Hey there, good evening. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz, a special edition of the Bronx Buzz. As you might or might not know, we usually talk to reporters and writers and editors and journalists and authors. He said with a little asterisk for this evening's program. And this evening we have an author, the author of this book. It's The Last Miracle, my 18-year journey with the amazing New York Mets. He's a Bronx Walk of Famer, and he's a member, of course, of the Bronx Hall of Fame, of the New York Mets Hall of Fame. And so it is my esteemed pleasure to welcome Bronxite. He's a Bronx boy still, Ed Kranepool. Nice to talk to you. Nice to see you. And thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure being back in the Bronx.
That's it. Congratulations on the book. I really enjoyed it, and I had this sense that it was forthright, it was hard hitting, pulling no punches. It's exactly what we'd expect from a Bronx boy. You have a little Bronx tude in you, but you told me just a moment ago you wanted to tell the truth. You had I saw a quote that you said you did it because Cleon Jones wrote a book, Art Shamsky wrote a book, Ron Swoboda wrote a book. Seems like you had things you wanted to say, right? You'd been holding it in all this time.
Well, everybody wrote a book, but none of them can go back to 1962. The only guy that was with the organization back in 62 was Cleon Jones, and he didn't come to the major leagues till around 65, 66. So I figured it was about time to do it. Ralph Kiner had passed away. He's the only one that could talk about the early years. So I figured let's get it out there.
We'll talk about the 62, the section about those early years, which I have to tell you, I thought was fascinating, and I've read a ton. You can see I'm wearing my Mets colors today, but I'd never heard such detail about those years. But let's just go back to the Bronx days. You played in Castle Hill Playground. At what point, did you say, "Hey, I could be a pretty good player"? Did that come up, or you just were like any other Bronx kid, and you're like, "Well, I can kind of hit."
No, actually, I was pretty good right from the start, and fortunately for me, I could play, and that's the way I made my living back in those days. If we played stickball or something, and it was for money, I didn't have any money in my pockets, but I still played, and I did pretty well. So I was very fortunate to be able to play every day with the older boys.
Stickball, or specifically baseball, softball? I mean, because I know I played a ton of stickball in the schoolyard
We
and
played stickball. We
you played
played
stickball.
stickball. We played baseball. I used to play stickball against the older kids, and they all like to play for a few pennies, 25 cents or whatever. And when you choose to be up first or last, and you're playing against the hard wall, the handball wall, and you drew a box, I would always
Love
take
it.
first. Whether I won or lost the toss, I would always take first. And people would say, "You're crazy. You should be up
You
last."
should bat last, of course,
Well, you would think so, right? But I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't let you get up. If
because
I
you
keep
just
you
smacked
out
the
there
ball.
pitching all day, you're going to quit before the game's over. And you know what? I don't have to worry about pitching. Normally, I was good enough to stay at the plate, and we had a lot of fun playing. And I played all the time with the older guys. They always protected me. The Bronx had a bad reputation, but these guys would take care of me. It wanted me on the team. They sent me home every night, so they made me get home at the right time, and I didn't get in any trouble.
Wow. Now, so you were at James Monroe High School. I have mentioned to you, my father was a teacher there, and I got to see you play in high school, which is exciting.
Right.
Monroe had a good baseball program and a good athletics program. And so I guess that benefited you to be able to develop your skills to the old age of 17. But Monroe did have a good James
We
Monroe
had a
High
good
School.
baseball team. We had a good coach. Steve Ray was the original coach.
Right.
He talked me into going to Monroe, and by the time I got there, he became a scout for the White Sox. That's how became involved with me later on. When I was ready to sign at the end, I called Steve up and gave him the last opportunity to bid on me after the Mets, and I only let the Mets come into my house, and we negotiated a contract, and I told Johnny Murphy, who was the vice president of the Mets, and Bubba Gennard, who was the scout who signed me, I said, before I sign the contract, I want to give the White Sox the last opportunity. I was favoring my high school coach, to
Right.
give him a shot at it. And they said, no, we can't match the offer. Sign with the Mets. It's a great offer. And I did.
And of course, now you were a Yankee fan growing up. I mean, let's be fair, right? I
Right.
mean,
I
you're a
was.
Bronx
There were
boy.
no,
I mean,
the Mets weren't in existence when I grew up. I was a
oh, that's
Yankee
right,
fan
of course.
being brought up in the Bronx. I don't think you want to say you're a Dodger fan.
And
They beat them too many times.
yeah, but you know what else? You wore number 7. You had I'm going to go from the left side. You had that left-handed stance. I always said your stance from the left side was very Mickey Mantle-ish. You
Well,
did
Mickey
have
was a favorite
you had a
player.
big back just like Mantle.
Yeah, he was a big favorite of mine. But I didn't sign with the Mets wearing number 7.
Yeah, it was
My first
21.
number was 21. And
21,
I
yeah.
played a couple of years in the major leagues at 21. And what happened was Warren Spahn joined the ball club back in 65. Very few people realize that. I had number 21. I gave it to Warren Spahn when he joined the
Oh,
ball club. And then the ball club said, well, we have only small numbers, lower numbers. You've got to take a low number. And 7 was available at the time. I
so you
think
took it.
Elio Chacon wore it at shortstop. And I said, let me have Elio's. He's not going to be around. And he wasn't.
So
And
there you go.
number 7.
So you broke Hank Greenberg's record in high school. You had never been out of the Bronx before. In the book, let's just remind people about the book. In the book, you talk about the night of your. I just can't even imagine it. Your night. I'm a Dewey Clinton guy. The night of your high school graduation, you signed this rather at that time large bonus contract to play for the Mets, and then you'd never been out of the Bronx before, and then like the next day or 2 days later, you're sitting next to Casey Stengel at Dodger Stadium.
That's right. My mom didn't take us on any road trips, and she did the best she could, what she had. And we didn't travel around too much. Our summer consisted of going to the playground early in the morning, playing stickball, handball, whatever you wanted to do, baseball, softball. And then in the afternoon, they had these showers, in one of the areas, and you took a cold shower and that was it. You didn't go away to a camp. You
Yeah,
didn't
right.
you didn't
And
spend time away.
so your first game, you're sitting next to literally 17. Folks, think about this: 17-year-old boy sitting next to Casey Stengel in Dodger Stadium. In your first game, Sandy Koufax throws his no-hitter against the Mets.
Struck out 13 and, came down towards the end of the game. And there was an opportunity to pinch hit, I think, in the 8th inning. It was Gene Woodling and myself were sitting there. And Casey looked at both of us and he said, you know what, I think I'll put Gene up to save you. And he didn't put me up there. And, Gene struck out on 3 pitches and it wasn't too easy. He said, this is tough. I've got to get a different bat. He ordered new bats. He got lighter bats. He said it was too tough to bat against Koufax. So I was glad he
It
saved
was
me.
too tough for a lot of people to bat against Koufax. So we do have video of your first hit. So maybe we can roll that video of.
But that was a long time ago. That was against the Chicago Cubs. And it was down the left field line, I remember.
Nothing Ed would enjoy more than getting his first major league base hit. Line drive, base hit, going down the left field line for Ed Kranepool. He's on his way to second. And Kranepool is then standing up with a double. Well, there is a moment to remember for 17-year-old Ed Kranepool. He hit the ball hard. A low liner between Ron Santo on the bag and down the left field line into the corner. A 2-base.
Oh, there you go. Can you still see that? I mean, obviously there was no footage of it, but can you still see that in your mind?
Well, I could. And I used to hit the ball at all the fields.
Mm-hmm.
I rated around. So when they changed the rules and they started moving the defense, and in the last couple of years, when they didn't have anybody at third base in the left field side for a lot of these left-handed hitters, I looked at that and said, boy, that's an extra 30, 40 points. I'd get a lot of base hits in the left field. That'd be a lot of fun, and guys were complaining. But the game has changed, and now they want you to hit home runs, so they want you to lift the ball and hit the ball to right field. So maybe it wouldn't help me, but I could have hit the ball down the third base line all day.
Uh,
I'd get one hit a game.
Keith Hernandez has said on the Mets broadcast very often. He said, "Boy, I wish they had done that to me, just like you. He'd have hit the ball to left field all the time."
Yeah, you take advantage of it, and you'd be getting a double. There would be nobody in left field. You look over there and you say, "This is cherry picking. This is easy stuff."
I want to just ask about the notion of being 17 years old. Now, it seems crazy. Rather than have you room with maybe another rookie, another youngster, you roomed with Frank Thomas, one of the veterans. You write in the book that you couldn't go out. They went out to drink and stuff, and you were 17 years old. At some point, did you say, this is just a little bit crazy? I mean, this is
Well, it
like,
was crazy. He was 35 and I was 17. He had a large family. We used to visit his family when we went to Pittsburgh, and that was great. But and I was looking forward to that. But I couldn't socialize with these guys, so it wasn't any
incredible.
fun. A couple of years later, we started adding players to the ball club, and then the game started becoming a little fun. But remember, when you're losing every day, baseball is never fun when you lose. The writers are always writing about the negative game part of the game that cost you the game. So if you get a couple of hits, they never write
They
about
never
it.
know,
So they
yeah,
don't
because the
get
losing
stuff.
was the thing. You wrote extensively about the fact that you didn't get the kind of development that young players get today,
Right.
for example. Do you think you'd have been a bit? Now, listen, the stats are there. You played 1853 games, most of any Met. You're second in plate appearances, third in hits on the team, fourth in double, fifth in RBIs. Do you think that your career would have even been better and you've been a better player had you gotten the kind of development that young players get today?
No question about it. If I would have signed with a better ball club and got sent to the minor leagues, like the ball club wanted to do in 1962 and 63, they were going to send me out. George Weiss wanted to send me out in 63. And Casey said, "How can I send him out? He's my best hitter." I led the ball club in hitting in spring training. So he said, "We'll start him in right field." They
Wow.
didn't even play me at first base, my original position. They played me in the outfield. I hit the cleanup, I believe, against the St. Louis Cardinals in the Polo Grounds. It was the opening day of the season. So it was difficult. I would have been much better developing a year or two in the minor leagues, playing against my own age kids and developing. Later on, when I kept going back to the minor leagues, I hit 300 every place I played. So it was much easier, and I finally caught up with the league. But meanwhile, the fans in New York thought I was around so long that, he's over the hill.
Over the hill. I
But,
remember
but,
that. Yeah,
but I
Zed
was only
Kranepool over the hill.
25, 26, right in my prime when I started to hit 300. I hit 323, 300, 292. I caught up with the league. Then they wanted to find another first baseman, and they made me a pinch hitter. And I did that for a number of years and led the league in pinch hitting 5 years in a row and set an all-time record pinch hitting. So I could hit, and you just had to get in the lineup. So I played left field, right field, then I went back to first base.
You let's see, hit 486 as a pinch hitter in 1974. That's a
That's an
number that
all-time record. It's
all
never
it's
been broken.
incredible,
You had to
incredible.
have at least 30 at bats in one season as a pinch hitter. I had 35 that year and had 17 hits. Every time I went up, I got a base hit. I was ready to play, and I was trying to show up the manager. Really, that's what I was doing it for. I wanted to get a hit every time up. This way, here I could say, "Hey, your best hitter's on the bench. There's no reason to leave
Right.
him there. You better be
I'm
playing him."
I'm smiling because there's that Bronx attitude, Bronx tude
Yeah.
coming through. Do now you talk a lot about the veterans that the Mets brought in that many of them were over the hill at that point. Do you think they cared if they lost? It was like, well, this is just, and that for a young player like you, that impacted because you wanted to win, of course, and you were surrounded by Warren Spahn and Yogi Berra and others who, they'd already done their thing.
Well, the thing is, some of the guys were going after their own records. Warren Spahn was doing that. That's why he didn't last very long. And they wound up getting rid of him. I mean, they brought him over to be the pitching coach and help some of the young pitchers. But he was interested in putting himself in to get the saves and the win.
Um,
so they couldn't make him the pitching coach. They got rid of him, and the other
Wow.
guys, they all wanted to win, but you know what? You have to have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And at 35, back in the early years, you were over the hill by that time, and they were looking to replace you with a younger player. The Mets had older players, stars from the past, stars from the Giants, stars from the Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the fans loved to see them, and they brought them in here, but they were past their prime. You know, until the steroid era came in, guys couldn't play after 35. They didn't go out and give them a job. Most guys over 35 were on the bench,
Hmm.
pinch hitting or playing occasionally. But, you know, when we played, hey, you were over the hill and they bring in a young player to replace you. But the
What
game changed.
Casey Stengel was such, in a way, a cartoon character. The amazing, amazing, amazing Mets. We've all seen those, those highlights. Did you learn baseball from him? Did he teach you? Was he a good man? You know, I know he won all those World Series with the Yankees. You know, I could have managed that team and won with that team. Was Casey a good manager? Did he teach you about the game?
He was a good manager, and he loved the young players, and he wanted to work with the young players. I think what happens is, you know, you get a false impression of Casey Stengel being, a jokester. He was a jokester because it was appropriate at the time with the Mets. He was taking some of the pressure off the players, and they weren't writing about the players. They were writing about Casey and losing, etc. But the players didn't get the flack. He was doing that as a favor. He always worked with the young players. He was great with the young guys. He'd sit you alongside of them. He'd talk baseball all the time. He was the first one in the clubhouse, the last one to leave. You couldn't believe the energy that Casey had. He just looked old. I mean, he was
Right.
old, obviously. He was 75, I guess, when
But
he
he knew the
retired.
game. He knew the
But
game.
he knew the game. I mean, he was into the game. He didn't have the players to really participate against the rest of the league.
Yeah. You know, we're going to move it ahead. We'll run out of time. We could talk about every year, but Gil Hodges was a sea change. I mean, the reverence for him is universal. As a youngster, I thought it was, and to this day, the greatest managerial job that I've ever seen with that 1969 team. Platooning was good for the team, but it really wasn't good for Ed Kranepool. They brought in Don Clendenin, and all of a sudden, your playing time dried up.
No, it does. It didn't help anybody. But Gil was smart enough to be able to talk all the players into believing in it and working as a team. And the Mets had a team, and we had the best ball club. But it didn't help any of the guys. Didn't help Art Shamsky, who was a good left-handed hitter. Kenny Boswell, Wayne Garrett. We all platooned. Everybody platooned on the left side. And of course, at the end of the year, when they looked at your records, they did it accordingly. They only played 80 games, 100 games, whatever it
So
was.
then you
They
couldn't
didn't
sign
play
a contract. That's right.
well, you couldn't sign a long-term contract. They didn't exist back in those days. When they came about, it was too late in our careers
Right.
to really take advantage of it. But nobody liked platooning. Nobody still likes it. They don't enjoy it. You want to play every day. That's a fallacy, putting lefties up only against right-handers.
One of the biggest moments of the season was a base hit that you hit. We're going to take a look at that. I mean, this was as memorable a game that they had in 1969 as any. So let's roll the little videotape here.
Ferguson Jenkins trying now to send the ball game into extra innings. There is a drive into short left. It is a base hit. The ball game is all over. Kranepool dropped one in short left. Jones scores, and the Mets win the ball game 4-3.
I remember Lindsey Nelson on the radio on the Mets broadcast at the time was like, "Look at the New York Mets." That was a big moment, wasn't it? Certainly to beat the Cubs down the stretch.
The game earlier in the game, I hit a home run to right field against Fergie Jenkins. I used to do fairly well against him. And then in the ninth inning, I drove in Cleon Jones. We win the game. I think we beat them in the whole series 4 in a row when they came to New York. That was the turning point for the Cubs. Now they have to look over their shoulders. They're not 10 games ahead. They're down to 6 games. And we went from there right on to sweeping them and beating them by 10 games. So it was a tremendous year in the second half.
You had that World Series home run. We can take a quick look at that, and then we'll move it into the post 1969. So let's take a look at Ed Kranepool hitting a home run in the World Series. Every Bronx kid's dream.
Home run that puts the Mets out in front 5-0.
Still give you a thrill when you see it?
Still does, and that's what you play the game for. You want to get into the playoffs in the World Series. We got into it later on. A couple of years went by. We struggled a little bit. We lose our manager. We replace him with Yogi Berra, and then we win again in '73, and that was the biggest disappointment for myself. We should have won that World Series in 6 games.
You were pretty critical of Yogi starting Seaver on short rest.
Well, there's no reason for it. Nobody's ever done it in his whole career. This is 1973. He came up in the early 60s, and he always pitched on 4 days rest. So now why are you going to get smart and change the rotation on Tom Seaver? Let him pitch on 4 days, which would have been Sunday. He might never have gotten the pitch because George Stone was 12-3 that year. 7 wins in a row coming down the stretch. Why not pitch them?
You talked a lot in the book, the book. And by the way, we should mention Gary Axelbank, who did such a great job with you as, kind of co-writing it, so to speak. But in the book, you talk about a lot of they brought in veterans or they traded good players. Why do you think you lasted so long to play the most games for the New York Mets? Because they could have said, "Hey, here's a guy. He's been around a while. We're moving it forward."
Just like they did all the other players. But
that's right. And you're very, very frank about that. You really acknowledge that they really dispensed with people pretty quick.
They did, and if they didn't perform, but every time they put me in a position, I did well. I hit anytime they put me in a position. I only complained when I didn't play. There's nothing wrong with complaining about wanting to play. That was my only complaint. I want 4 at-bats. I don't want 1 at-bat. Give me 4 chances to drive in some runs. And I didn't get them at the end, and that was the time I was ready to retire.
One of the things that I read, which I was shocked, you are the guy who got that infield drag rule changed because of the high grass at Shea Stadium. So why don't you just explain what that was about?
Grass, what I did was we lost a game down in Houston on a bad hop. A ball hit a ball in the infield. After the 5th inning, they come and rake the field. They never used to rake it after that. So by there, if you had an old extra inning game, you could play as long as you want. And we played some games that were pretty long, 26 innings, 23 innings.
That's right.
We lost a game in Houston in 23 innings. The ball took a bad hop and went over Al Weiss's head. And it was crazy. There was no reason for it. We lose the ball game. So I said, hey, why don't they drag it after the 5th, which they do? And that was part of the ruling. But after the 9th, drag it again, the 15th, the 20th, and keep going.
And you made it happen.
Field, and it worked. They looked at it, and it made sense.
I had forgotten until I reread it in your book is that they had they call the Midnight Massacre when they traded Seaver. They traded Kingman on the same day. That's pretty shocking. I suppose the trading of Scherzer and Verlander was different now because they brought in young people. In those days, they brought in veterans like Jim Fregosi who didn't work out. But I didn't realize that they had traded the two of them. That must have been as a teammate. That must have been hard to watch.
Well, it was tough for the ball club because you lose a franchise player. You don't get the players you're supposed to get for him. You're not doing the picking. They're giving you the players. There's no reason for that. Same way with Dave Kingman. He was a great player offensively. He could hit a lot of home runs. Today, he'd be a superstar with his current bat angle. Right. He had launch angle before it even existed, and he hit a lot of home runs. And both of these guys leave your ball club in one day, and you got to replace these guys, and you can't do it. And when we don't, the ball club really starts to flounder.
You watch the game at all today? You watch some baseball these days?
I watch it. I don't watch it as often as I used to. I used to be a
Sure.
big follower. When I did retire, I wanted to go in the front office, and I think I could have been an asset. Right now, I don't follow it enough, and it's a little tough to, recognize all the players.
Well, there you go, and they certainly get more, work as young players than you did. There was that period of time, and I as a kid, you don't realize it. Three left-handed first basemen, Shamsky, Jorgensen, and Kranepool. Very hard to. It's not a good plan, and it's very hard to find playing time. Listen, I want to just get to the final thing, the last miracle. Many people would say, well, that was the '69 Mets, but you had a couple of miracles that happened for you and your wife, and I think it's a nice way to conclude this a conversation, especially because that is the last miracle. Let's talk about that.
Well, it was myself. I had some physical problems. I got a new kidney. I was fortunate enough to get a donor, and I've been feeling well for the last 4 years. And then we had some diabetes and took my toes, and then finally the last miracle was my wife. She came down. We moved to Florida, and we're married now. Last night we were married 43 years, and she comes down with prostate cancer, and the doctor says your wife's pretty sick, pancreatic
cancer,
right, which is a lot more serious, and we have to take care of that. So moving to Florida, I thought was going to be a good thing. Wasn't a good thing. It was very serious for us, and over a year's worth of ailment with my wife, and we took care of it. And we found a doctor in Miami, and he did a great job. He did the surgery, and he was able to shrink the tumor and then cut it out, and she's feeling well these days, and we're very happy.
That is the last miracle.
Can't ask for anything better,
and we can hear her in the background, so we know she's still taking care of you. Listen,
taking care of me.
I guess you wish they had the DH. You'd have been a great DH. I mean, maybe you like to play the field,
but it wouldn't have helped the other guys because I wouldn't have left any hits for them.
There you go. Listen, so the book, folks, it's really, especially if you're a Met fan, but really any baseball fan, The Last Miracle, my 18-year journey with the amazing New York Mets. Ed Kranepool, thank you to Gary Axelbank, who did a fantastic job with you. And I don't know what's next. We'll see you out at the ballpark maybe one day. That would be nice.
Look forward to it anytime.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Ed Kranepool, member of the Bronx Walk of Fame, and of course, member of the New York Mets Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. I know you're in Florida now. Enjoy your time. Get some sunshine, and let's go Mets. Can we say that?
Let's go Mets. You're right. I'm always rooting for them. I never
stop.
Root for the Mets.
All right. Thank you very much, the great Ed Kranepool, ladies and gentlemen. And that will do it for our program this evening. We thank you all for joining us. And, as I always say, if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be back next week. So we'll see you then. Good night.